And voila, we're here. We made it through IVORY5 live stream to clear out some doubts and just brainstorm around the plugins that a lot of you have asked me to cover after the limiter video. So first and foremost, thank you very much for the incredible support, the love, unconditioned love that you just sent me over through that video. I'm super happy you loved it. I'm gonna follow through with the kind of the same methodology to, so to speak, and just brainstorm my way through the entire bundle, because I think this is gonna be cool, and it's gonna be so much stuff that I thought it would be better if you just cover it over the stream. It's gonna be a lot more unofficial. I have my water here, I have my footrest and stuff. So for those of you who didn't follow whatever happened here in the past few days, on the day of the Euro Cup, when Italy actually won, yeah, I broke, like I severed my Achilles tendon, my right one. So I managed to get home by foot, walking like some sort of duck, at least on one side of myself, and went to the hospital and checked it, and was clearly severed and injured. So I had surgery on Friday. I don't remember, but I think it was a Friday. So everything went fine, I'm home. So now you're stuck with me for kind of 4 to 8 to 12 weeks. I don't know what's gonna happen to my holidays, but I would have been sitting here anyway. That's the beauty of being an audio geek, nerd, musician, composer, whatever you wanna call me. So, it's great. My wife is attending at me. It's fantastic. Kat is here. I have everything I need. People love me. And I thought that since I have a lot of time at my disposal, and just a shot to get every day and just eat healthy and wait for my wound to heal, we would talk about plugins. That's the best thing ever that we can do. So the IVORY5 Limiter actually happened a couple days before I went into surgery. That's like, I went super fast. I know that the video was gonna be fantastic, and it was just something that I said, this is gonna be cool, because I know how to use this. I think people are gonna be interested, and I'm super happy that it happened. And now we're picking up on the good pieces of what happened in that video, and we're going to cover this as well. So as usual, let me just check that things are in order. I think they are, but we never know. So I usually check myself out. Ooh, sexy. So let's get back to chat so I can see, whatever comment you might have or not. And let's put my foot here so that, yes, so that I have a better resting position, more relaxed. Cocktail here, a little bit of water. Fun enough, pencil, it's not been used for quite some time. Let me prepare some water, very dangerously actually, I might say, because you don't want to have liquids on your desk. But since I'm the owner, there's usually a sort of like a cliche where the owner is kind of allowed to do that. So let's cover these. Let's close this browser and let's talk about Ivory. Before I do that, I had a person that requested that I would just talk briefly about Sienna, which is another product that Acustica Audio does. So just in case you want to set yourself up in your studio for Sienna to listen to this stuff, you can do that if you have it, obviously. So the way I would do it is, which is actually kind of what would happen, is you open Sienna Guru, and right after that, you open Sienna Reference Pro, in my case, because I have Guru. You are not forced to do this if you don't want to do it. You can just use the Rooms version, which is the plugin up there, or you could use the Reference Pro. The purpose of these two plugins is that the bottommost one, the smaller one, is able to fix your headphones problems. Every headphone is not linear, and they measured it and they compensate for the errors in your headphone. So you go here to headphones, you select your model. Last time I used it, I had my Utopia set up here, They're right there, so it's set to Focal Utopia. If your headphone model is not there, request it. Bother Acoustic all the time and say like, hey, this, that will add it with time, obviously, to the database. You have a dry wet, you have your magic cue, which is a way to, it's kind of a proprietary way of handling the frequency correction. You can read the manual in it. The 1.5, 2, and J are actually tiny differences around the 3 kilohertz that if I remember it right, which is where a lot of people perceive the sort of like brighter presence of a mix. Our ears are very accustomed to that area, and so you might find it better for your taste to use 2 instead of 1 or 1.5 or J. The rest is saving presets, and it's just an output trim. I usually either like to work this way, or I kind of like to, but this is very personal, to go like this. The trim doesn't really matter that much, but I like to go 67%, like 2/3 correction and 1/3 original, and kind of move the magic cue a little bit towards the corner, like the bottom right corner of the button 1. That's how I remember. It's very empirical, but it works. So before this, if you want to emulate the listening position in a room, Acoustic Audio provides us with Sienna Rooms. So Sienna Rooms is an emulator it's an acoustical room simulator in which you select your preset for rooms. There's different studios in which different speakers were sampled, and the acoustics were sort of captured in a way that you can fine-tune it, and so on and so forth. If you are using rooms before Sienna Reference Pro, as I do, you must set the headphones correction to last empty to reference, because that means that Sienna Rooms is going to go before Sienna Reference Pro. So you have to deliver this to reference in order to get the correction system. Supposedly, if you have another correction system, or if you have a headphone amplifier with a crosstalk that you really love, whatever, you can set it to empty, for example. You can still try to reference and just give it a try. If you don't want to use Sienna Reference Pro and you just want to use the rooms, just go to your headphone selection and go to your headphones. So in this case, go to, for example, I would go to Focal and select Utopia, and that's it. If you have different headphones, obviously select yours. This allows you to not use the Reference Pro, but obviously in this way, if you have it set up this way, it's going to be the most complete, I would say, the most feature-rich environment, because you have control over the correction system as well. The way you set your rooms, the guru part with filtering, distance and width, speaker binaural, depth and classic and stuff, is entirely up to you. The only thing I would say is this: do not start going around with different rooms. Just try and focus on one and try and get accustomed to that room. I don't particularly like full perfection, but I don't particularly like zero perfection either. I kind of find that I tend to like it better when I can barely see, and lo and behold, how scientific I am. When I can barely see the horns of the letter C. I don't know if that makes sense to you, because it's super small. But when I can see the horns of the letter C, to me, that's my sweet spot, usually. Like, for whatever reason. I think it's a 50%. Don't quote me on that. But that's how it is. Second thing I want to say is that if you are feeling that things are too centered, well, they are, because the way a headphones usually sound for mixes is that things are very left-right, right? And a lot of people hate these, and a lot of people find it overemphasized, and a lot of people think it's complicated for mixing. It gets it very hard to nail the vocals in the mix, and it's kind of true, and don't want to go there now. But what I usually like to do is do two things. If you think you're narrowing it down too much and you like a little bit more left-right, either move the binaural to speaker kind of around there. Sometimes I went even here at like, what is it, 9 o'clock, and found it kind of enticing to still have that headphone behavior. Because I don't really hate how headphones propose the mixes. I kind of like that sometimes things are very left and right. So for whatever reason, it might work to you. Or second thing, move the pan ++. So usually you'll find that a lot of settings revolve around 3D, so the rightmost part of the knob. I kind of have to say that I kind of like it around 2 or 3 of the classic side sometimes. But that's just 2 small tips, very theoretical. Make sure you're not clipping anything. I like to usually go -12 and either 0 here or a good -3 or another -6 either. And give a little bit more juice to my headphone amplifier. I know a lot of you are going to ask what kind of headphone amplifier I have. I have a Dangerous Music MQ. They no longer make this. It was a meter and Q unit with VU meters, additional analog inputs, Q sources for recording rooms and blah, blah, blah. But it has a very, very nice headphone amplifier that I really, really love. And that's what I use. So what else? It gets fed from the Dangerous monitor, which also gets fed from the Dangerous master, which gets fed from my Lavry DAs. So, right now we're going digital to the Lavries, to the Dangerous monitor, to the speakers. Right. So, what else? I think we're pretty much done. This was my sort of bracket around Sienna. I'm not going to use it now because I'm going to use speakers, and we're going to move on to the IVORY5 suite. I still have 4 installed. There's only 1 track right now, which is source. What we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this. How great it is that I have all the time in the world because I barely can move. I only have crutches to go around. And so you are like, I'm probably more in need of you than you are of me, because otherwise it's just like, what am I gonna do here? Let's gonna talk audio. So 2 tracks now. We're gonna use source as source. We're not gonna touch that, and we're gonna use the yellow one as ivory, whatever, or processed. Seasoned professional would use processed. So here we're gonna put some ivory plugs. So I still have ivory 4. I think we're gonna go with the 5. For those of you who don't know it, anytime you see ZL, it means 0 latency. So a lot of plugins, pretty much all of them, I think have the ZL equivalent. It uses a lot more CPU than the normal version, but it possesses 0 latency behavior. So, just so you know, it could be good. If you need that for tracking, for example. So we're not gonna use that. I'm just gonna make sure my buffer is set to a healthy level. Probably maybe not that. Minimum latency 256. I don't wanna have you click over stuff. So I'm gonna go with the 512 for now because we're not gonna have too many. We're gonna keep an eye on our monitoring here on how much CPU we're using. We're doing fine now with 0 for sure. So IVORY5, IVORY5S. Let's bring these down to science. What's the difference between plugins in which you see the S? For those of you who don't know it. S stands for stereo, and usually Acustica Audio likes to have S versions of their plugins. So if you find an S version, it stands for stereo. What it does is you now have control over different channels of the unit. So if we had a real Mazalek MEA2, because I'm not gonna go around and just say, this hypothetical unit, I like to think about the real unit. I don't own a Mazalek EQ, but I've worked with people who are huge Mazalek fans and mastering studios or mixing engineers that have very few hardware pieces that actually revolve around Prism and Maslek, and you know, for a good reason, because they're great. They also have, and I've used Maslek mastering consoles, which are fantastic with their elliptical filters. You can destroy mixes if you don't know what you're using, but they really, really sound great. So the rightmost plugin is the stereo version, so anything we do would be copied instantly from left to right. The other one can do the same thing, but has two channels, so left and right. Right? So what I would do is probably I would ditch the normal version and we would go with the stereo version, because why not? You can still link the channels and you can use it in mid-side. You can still use the preamplifier. There's a super cool meter taken from, I don't remember the brand of this meter, but I actually like it a lot in real life. You know, I think sort of like the Phoenix. Yeah, the Phoenix has two of these. So yeah, I don't have any other piece of gear that has that, but my Phoenix does, which is cool. So first thing that I would do is passing on knowledge to you. Rule number one, set your custom default startup. Do it, because it takes quite some time to tailor a plugin in acoustic audio world compared to the others, just because of how the engine works at the moment. So I would create my own default. If it is to your liking, leave it at that. But what I would do with this plug, for example, I would engage the pre, I would engage control link, C-link. I would like to see the meter in for left and meter in for out. I think we're okay. I would engage all of the bands. I don't think you can bypass a single band in the Maslek. I think that 0 is a hard bypass on the unit, which the Sontex didn't have, which is a very, again, important feature for mastering engineers. So I think that the Maslek actually disables the band in the path when the switch is set on 0 dB. But I don't want to deal with in and outs and all of that. The second thing I would do is I want a shelf on the bottom. I want a shelf on the right, on the high shelf. And I want to set these to 12, the high shelf, and I want to set these to 51. And I want to set the middle parts to, let me see, maybe 200. And it's kind of a shame that the low mids in the Maslek don't reach out to, I would say, even 1K. I would love to. And in the fuse EQ that I have, I can actually go times 1.6, which is a custom equalizer that I made years ago, and there's only one, and it's here. Because there's this need for me to go to the high mids that you sometimes cannot do. So it could be 200. And this one, let's use something like, I really have no idea, 2K400, 2400. The Q, I usually tend to stay kind of a narrow thing, so it could be a 6, it could be a 9 here. Does it make sense? Like, do you use all the frequencies that I'm listing here, the 4 frequencies, all the time on every mix and master? Of course not. But as a starting point, you would leave your EQ, right, to what you like to use, right? Everybody does. So I like to reset things that make sense to me, and I will keep it this way. So in Studio One, I would go here, store as default preset, boom, go. So now we have our own setup right here. How does this work? Well, there's very little to explain. Closer EQ, closer numbers, this is not Q, it's actually octaves, dB per octaves. So the higher number means a higher Q, and the lower number means a sharper Q. A lot of people I've worked with in Sontex and Maslek 2 and GML as well, they kind of don't like very wide cards. And I've grown up with these people as a 20-year-old, hearing always about how the wide bands of these very famous equalizers are never like used that much. There's a phase thing, I don't know, there's other people that like very wide curves, but I kept hearing this You know, it's just a trivia I'm throwing at you. Even on a Soundtech 432, a lot of seasoned professionals I've known that have very out of spec 432s, but beautiful and expensive and very sought after, they kind of tend to gravitate to these smaller, sharper cues for some reason in the mid bands. And they might go wide for shelving. It's a different thing. So, set. Let's give it a try for whatever reason. What do I have here? This is, decommissioned data center. All right. We like this. It's a song I wrote for a video game that's gonna get out probably in 2023. So how cool is that? You can listen to some music. And this is the soundtrack from the audio events that can happen. So this is not actually, probably not how it will be in the game, but it's the sort of interaction of all the elements brought into a song so that then I can market it as, you know, a soundtrack that you can listen to as well. How smart I am. I don't even remember actually these you know, obviously the name is from the part of the game where things happen, but let's just play through this because it's not the finished version. This is a backup version of audio prints that I usually do. I do no mix bus prints, so that I have an image of the file that I never listen to because I never listen to this without the mix bus. But it happens to help me in case I have to rebuild the mix bus or I have to send it to a mastering engineer, whatever. It's just a safety print. But because it has no mix bus, it has all of the issues that we might be able to solve with this. So EQ, see where we go. To move over here. Oh, this is a very ambient-y. This is a very ambient-y kind of song. So, you know, it might be that we want to move from here. I want to spoil the entire game for you. Wow, this guy's really good. I mean, you should hire him as a composer. I actually didn't remember some of the interaction parts, you know, when you listen to your songs back after a while, and there's like a couple things that you wrote maybe out of the blue, inspired, and then you go like, oh, right, I did write that. It's pretty cool. So it's a very flowy and watering kind of part, ambient. I can't tell you the story of the game, but I know where this fits, and it's fantastic. The concept is great. You notice how I was going +8, -8, +8, -8 on all of the bands. Nothing really exploded, which is a particular feature that the Mazalecs have. And I think they're very authentic here as well. I kind of sense that there's no longer that kind of grinding sort of attitude that Ivory 4 had. I'm not sure if that's changed. I haven't tried it on this song, obviously. So it sounds a bit more, I wouldn't say silky, but towards a silkier kind of thing. The particular behavior of a Mazalec is that it's very renowned for being transparent, and so is the compressor and all the stuff they make. But that to me isn't actually true. I mean, they are transparent, but the great thing about them is that there is a snake vibe into it. I don't know, like there's a bite waiting to happen that is sometimes poking out in the watery darkness of how the EQ and compressors operate, and how smooth they are, that is actually capable of bringing a lot of attitude to songs, especially in finished stages, even with just a bare touch. So I wouldn't describe them as relaxed, as transparent relaxed. I think they're transparent glassy somehow, but I would say, yeah, there's a bite waiting to happen in all of their units. And here you can tell, obviously, that it works. I mean, the 12K works. I don't want to do a full review of it because, you can fiddle with it. I guarantee you that it works. I mean, the high band goes to 27K, but the other bell goes to 24. So there's a lot of things to think about. It's a beautiful EQ even for the 700 or something, for example. Let's move this band to actually 617 and up, and let's try and hear what happens in this part when I go around here. Because I write with a lot of synthesizers kind of love that part of the 600 to 800 to beef up, right? But even the lows at 50, they're present but never bloated somehow. It's just great. I mean, I wouldn't, as a composer, as the guy who composed these, I wouldn't want the 862 carved, but have you noticed how the mix kind of works anyway? And it is for my sensational songwriting skills, yes, but unfortunately, it's also because of how the equalizer works. To destroy a keyboard's mix at 862 and still have it believable in a way, it's kind of a cool feature, So I won't go around all of the other frequencies and stuff. If you have the guts and resources, I would always kind of go for control link and then use the stereo versions, just because there's a little bit more. We should test these actually. Let's see if there is actual discrepancy between two instances of Ivory, stereo and not. Like, does it make sense to use the same settings here and there? So to do this, we do a duplicate. Boom. So let's do this, which was empty. So these tracks here, and the other one's gonna use just this. All right, now we have the two tracks with two, let me put them one on top of the other, super. And let me flip it, mix tool. Mix tool is gonna make it possible for us to flip phase on number 2. Now, because I'm obsessive, compulsive, I usually like to put another one here where the inversion doesn't happen. Just so that there's identical plugins happening here, but trust me, Studio One is able to compensate them, so even if we bypass one or the other, it doesn't really matter. But, it's good to know that the two channels have identical plugs with just the functions you need, because Mix Tool in the state you see on the bottom just basically does nothing at all. Now, we duplicate these, bypass in, pre-in, turn on all of the knobs. Let me create my own preset as well, because, as I said, I like this to be that way. Actually, I had 6 here, 9 here, and 0 here. So this was 12, 51, and this one was what, 200, and this one was 24. Perfect. Now, because it's gonna be kind of problematic to create let me check, because I might just, not exactly nail it down, although it kind of seems possible. Let's take, did I save this as a preset? Yes, go. Okay, so this is now my preset, fantastic. And let's find a way to make it easy to do. So let's go 0, 0 here. Let me see, perfect. So I saved it, all right? We like how this sounds. And let's put everything to 0. Let's go 27K, let's go 530, and let's go to 1 and to 1 here. And let's do the same thing here, 0, 0. Let's go to 1 here. I want to make it sure that I can have the same identical levels and settings, like the clicks you would have on the unit. So I'm using visual cues, but I want to make it sure that we have a pretty cool thing. So now we have two units that have the same exact settings, only one is a stereo version and the other one is the mono, like the dual linked version. So if we listen to these, we get absolutely nothing. That's fantastic. Okay, so let me bring in, just to prove it to you, a level meter. Let me first, I want to pin every plugin I have because I hate it. All right, so our level meter says that we have pretty much nothing at all. So obviously if we disengage a preamplifier here, now we have, a difference in the two units. So let's try and go 2.4 here and go like 8 and 8. Still nothing. So if you intend to use identical left to right settings, save yourself the user interface space and everything, but do these kind of checks, for all of the plugins. You can use the stereo version, which has only one channel, and it's going to work fine anyway. Maybe it's going to use less resources, but if you need mid-side, obviously you can't do that. So there's no difference in sound. However, what happens if I unlink the channels and retain the settings? So now they're identical, but they don't have this. That was worth checking, because you never know. If you are feeling daring, you could sort of kind of create a little bit of discrepancy between the two channels and get the analog vibe. I won't blame you for that. I won't report you to the authorities for doing such a trick. Could work, maybe not on the lows, but on the highs, yes. So we ditch this track and we're done with our little test as well. What a fun Monday. I'm gonna keep this because we liked how it is, and we're gonna keep it this way. There's a lot you can do in mid-side. There's a lot of tricks and things we could do, but for now, let's say that this is pretty cool. So the second thing I would do is IVORY5 compressor. The compressor is Comp 1B here, and there's a 3-band, but let's go with the 1-band first. Boom. So what is the first thing we do? We set our desired starting preset, right? So here, this is what I would like. 0.2, ratio of 1.4, T-hold of, 0, output there, bypass expander, sidechain, clipper, just the preamplifier. Done. Reason for, I always kind of end up with the sidechain at around 125. I don't know if that's a 125, like right at 12 o'clock. This compressor sounds fantastic this way, but let's say that I'm keeping it like this. And let's do, I'm checking everything's fine, okay. And let's do a save, store as default preset. This is a clipper. If you want to use it, this red button. This is external sidechain, the green one. This is it turns it into expander mode, and this is a bypass, obviously. You have input trim, attack, T-hold, which is the threshold, the dry mix, output, makeup. You have a ratio, release, and sidechain filter internal. what is different about other stuff is the SOA. So you can kind of push the level of the compressor up, so that there's like a way to make the, how could I explain that? You can make the threshold and the signal meet at a different kind of point of energy in the compressor. I kind of usually like it at 0, but it's good to have. And let's try this, and let's see the loudest part actually of my song, because I wouldn't want it compressed too much. Or actually no, let's pretend we're still doing this. Let's try and massage it this way. Before I do it, comments that I have on this. The Maselec compressor is fantastic. It's by all means not clean. As I said, it does have an attitude to me, and it's very useful when you want to bring out expensive balls out of a song. Like if you have anything that is in the rock fusion genre that is that is way too smooth, like you have a very, very smooth R&B track and you want to kind of bring back to the energetic side, this is incredible. And I think it always helps things translate better. It's very hard to fail with this compressor. You will notice that these Maselec stuff always has very long attack and long releases. So they got 0.1, 0.2, and then we go up to 0.48, 1 second 6, 3 second 2. 3.2 milliseconds and blah, blah. No, 0.1, what is this? It's written there. Yeah, so this is 100 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds, 400 milliseconds, 800 milliseconds, 1 second 600. Yes, of course. So why would anybody want 1 second 600, right? So the reason for this is that the way the compressor works, you actually have quite a different sound that you would expect. It's kind of grabby, and it would have a lot of a sound. I wouldn't say an SSL, but it kind of grabs stuff very hard. So it isn't uncommon to go 100 attack and 0.8 on release, for example, which is something I usually never kind of do on an SSL. I like the fastest stuff and the attack at around 10 or 1, depending. Release either 0.1 or auto. I usually skip the stuff in the middle, but don't do it on the Maselecs and on Ivory, because that's where the unit kind of sings a little bit better. So let's play with this and let's keep going, because, right, we're here to have fun. that's actually, I should have used this to finish the mix. You heard around bar, just as a reference, bar 321, there is a very, very high pitch. It's like an octave and a half, like an octave and a fifth, so a 12th up on the strings that is just doing a sort of a resonance. It's another string track that is playing a 12th above what the strings are playing in the main part. And it's so easy to hear with nothing happening on the compressor, and that is just mind-blowing. I think it gets a little bit polished, a little bit cleaner, a little bit easy to translate for sure. The low levels feel still very low in level, and the high energy parts still feel capable of breathing. There's 200 milliseconds of attack, so we're not grabbing that much. So the dynamics still feel there, even if we had a moment where we had boom, sort of a 4, and then we went back up. It didn't feel as things were collapsing. So that's typical of these. And I went to 1.6 in the release because I want things to just float around. And you notice that I wasn't getting a lot of compression because of the threshold value. So I just moved the SOA to 6. That made the ends meet, as I said, a little better. That's the best way I have to do this. So filter to 50 hertz because I want the extreme lows to just, completely fill the cinema room without being entangled. That would be a great setting. Remember that before this, okay, this mix tool we can remove, we have the IVORY5 EQ that we had set this way. So I'm gonna keep going. There's no reason for me to, we're still gonna do A/B, right? So I'm gonna keep these plugins, and then for fun, we're gonna remove everything. One thing we should check is how does this compressor react to when we get to this section, because we haven't heard the energetic sort of section. So let's come from a bit before, and then let's go there. All right, here we're grabbing too much. So what I would do is I would automate this to avoid, moving that much. However, because even 200 milliseconds, I think it's kind of grabbing things a little bit too much, and they're so different that I will back off. I think I will back off from the threshold just to make sure I'm not grabbing on it. Because if I change the sidechain, I don't know, it's gonna change things too much. So yeah, I think I'm gonna have it hold less, just generally, and that's fine. I like it this way. You notice how it's still like reaching 0 GR even in on some little parts of the quiet things. And you probably notice that I have the input saying like, please stop because you're close to zero. I don't particularly hear it as problematic. I know I don't have that many fast transients here, so maybe you have a lot of fast transients, maybe it's gonna clip things too much. I'm just brainstorming. One thing we would do if we were in an analog environment and we would master things out, we wouldn't be looking for unity gain all the time, because the engineer knows that they have to get to a specific loudness level. They usually build it in steps. So if you keep gain staging and keeping things right, like they always match and you have no actual gain increase, you're gonna have to use one single device to jump up to the level you want, and that's usually never a good idea. It depends. There are units that can do lifting, as I call it. They can lift so many dBs without caring. I remember the Chandler's LTD2s were insane for these. We would just go like 9 dBs by, and it would sound even better. They have colored outputs, some of the units, so that's fine. This is a digital environment, so we actually are not pushing that much color through output stages. But, just so you know, if you were in analog and you were mastering, and, you would probably not always gain match. Not always, because then in the end you would be called upon using one device to jump to the desired level, and you're gonna call for more discrepancies in the output trim itself. If you just stage it naturally, a lot of engineers know when to push some devices. I know which of these devices, for example, generate less noise or less harmonics through their output stages, and they might be a good idea. Might be cool for some projects or not cool, depending on what I need. So here we're in digital. Things are a bit more linear from my tests in the output stages, so we're not really adding a lot of color because of these. But, so second stage is done. We're getting close to some of the crazy things. I think we're ready to do the dynamic stereo thing, because the dynamic EQ and the dynamic EQ stereo, because we're reaching a point. I want to keep the 3-band afterwards, just because it's kind of a bit easier. These people is one of the hardest yet most rewarding devices you will ever end up using, and you're gonna see how cool this is and how wrong one might be about expecting something that doesn't happen. Number one, create custom starting point, because it takes too much time to open it and set it up every single time. I want the preamplifier. I want every band in from the top and actually from the bottom. I trust this is clean enough. I want the OVF SOA, same thing of the compressor at 0. SH mod, which is like the attack behavior of the transients thing, there, 0.2, 30 is fine. Mix 100%. The trim is fine. Stereo link, this is kind of, I don't know. I'm probably gonna go full stereo link for the moment. Ratio 1.4, T-hold 0 plus 20 and minus 20. I think it's at the minus whatever 20. Let's keep it here. And ratio 0. Clipper, remember, it's always there hidden. To me, it's kind of hidden sometimes. It's a cool thing though that they hid it. I like that Acustica threw a curveball at us. Bands. Let's just for sympathy put it the same way we did it before. 9. Why not? I mean, it works, right? So 12, 51, 51, 200, 2.4, 12. There's a lot of very cool frequencies that work. I know it doesn't really make sense to say that, but there are EQs that are very cool on some frequencies. I think the 2.4 here sounds great. The 12 obviously is a great solution. I think that the 12 on the real unit kind of sounds like more the 14 here, for whatever reason. I would love to have a sort of a discussion on it, because I think it kind of has. Then 6, 9, done. We are going to store as default preset, and now we have to talk about how this works. If you've used any multiband or dynamic EQ, please do not think about that now. Please don't. Just start up fresh with no preconception on it, because it's kind of different from what you're used to. So here's how it works. You send a track to this EQ, and you can easily EQ with the topmost, with what's called the A EQ, the one at the top, and you can then turn the compressor on and compress, and you're actually having a compressor and an EQ. Actually, sorry, an EQ and the compression done, right there. The complicated stuff is, we know this is a dynamic EQ. So how does it work? It works like this. You engage dynamic EQ when you are compressing, and then you set the range. This range means that your equalization settings on the top are not gonna be what you set them up to. They're only gonna be what you set them up to once you have a specific number of dBs in gain reduction. So the more the compressor compresses, the more you go from flat to your settings in the EQ. Forget about the bottom one. I'm talking about the topmost one. So the more you're getting close to the value in gain reduction, that is what range has, the more you're gonna have an EQ setting that is close to what you set it up to. That's why people are having issues with this, because it's impossible to know that from the get-go unless you kind of read the manual, try it yourself and stuff. So you can dial it in and it's gonna sound static if dynamic EQ is off. So if this is off, it's done. You know, you're not gonna have it dynamic. It's gonna be EQ and compression and go right off the bat, right? Static. But if you go dynamic EQ, then you are compressing, and the more you're compressing, the more the EQ goes from flat to the settings that you have dialed in. So if you have 3 dBs of compression maximum and your range is at 0, you're hitting already pretty much all the time your desired EQ settings. If you put them on the same spot of music at -24, you're now increasing the scale at which the EQ will go from 0 to your settings. So the higher the range, the more fine-tuned, like the larger the scale is going to be for your EQ to reach your desired level. So that's how it works. If you have 8 dBs of compression and you move these around, you will hear that the EQ is getting closer or farther to what you dialed it in. The beauty of this is that equalization moves with compression. And you can use this to DS, you can use this to have external side chains, you can do this for whatever you want. I think a lot of people though, because the Ivory suite seems to be mastering oriented, are using these on finished mixes, which you can. But it's going to be very hard to determine the behavior of this plugin on a full-fledged mix. But we're gonna do it. Why? Because if your mix has dynamics, this thing can really work. For example, the soundtrack is perfect for this. Because if you have a part where you're not compressing and you have a part where you are, you can actually dictate a difference between your compressed part and your uncompressed part. So for a soundtrack, it's actually perfect because you have such a huge dynamic range that, for example, when you are loud, then you see that the settings you've dialed in are maybe too boxy. So you can make it work in a way that when you're starting to compress, you also get deboxed. The more it's compressing, the more it deboxes itself, right? Because you're gonna dial in a cut, for example, at 200 Hertz. So it's gonna sort of like de-muffle itself. I wouldn't say muffle, but yeah, maybe D200 itself. But you can also do it differently. You could have it that it's gonna open up when it's gonna compress. So it's doable. If you have a track that you're setting up in a way that you're always kind of getting the same compression, obviously it's not going to work that well. It's going to be still dynamic, but not that much. The EQ at the bottom, the one with the green LEDs, is the sidechain for the compressor. So this EQ you will never listen to, but it's what the compressor listens to. So you can emphasize some frequencies and make sure that the track actually tickles the compressor more or less in order to apply what you wanted. If you engage sidechain, then you can use an external sidechain, literally another song, another track, whatever you want to do. For example, you could use these on bass and use the sidechain from the kick drum. So every time the kick drum plays, your bass loses some of the 60 hertz, for example, so that the kick passes better. And I think that because of how the compressor works, longer attacks, longer releases, it's kind of hard to work it out in a sort of like more surgical way, so to speak, because the compressor itself is meant to work on a more sort of delicate way. But I think the idea is still pretty cool, and I think honestly that the soundtrack environment and things where you have a lot of dynamics play a large role. You know what as well? I just came up with it. Live recordings. If you have a live recording, if you've done live recordings of a jazz band, for example, I've always been on the other side, luckily, because it's extremely hard to track jazz right. You will notice that when the band plays with a lot of dynamic and goes loud, the club itself sounds different. When they go very low, then the double bass doesn't quite sound right, the drums are very sparkling, and sometimes you have a lot of mids from the piano and that's it, or maybe from a Hammond organ or whatever, depending on what kind of jazz setup is. So this would be great to set up a compressor with a dynamic EQ in a way that your live recording sounds right when it's not compressing, and when it's compressing, it actually fixes itself by having, for example, a little bit less mids from the piano, a little bit less EQ from the bass, because maybe you had EQ on the lower parts of the dynamics, and so on and so forth, with the added benefit of having compression. So it's gonna be better for a music listener afterwards to put a CD in and listen to it, because sometimes in jazz especially you have so much dynamics that it's very hard to keep the volume steady. My dad, for example, listens to a lot of jazz and he puts it at a bare level, just very, very low, and I'm usually surprised by how you can really listen to everything playing, because there's compression on it. It doesn't sound quite like there's compression, but there is. Even if you think, oh, it's so natural and uncompressed, it's actually not true, because otherwise you would miss a lot of the lower dynamics and you would have too much of the higher ones. So this is actually fantastic for acoustic music. Now, let's try and bring it to these other songs. Let's pretend the settings I have right now work for these other songs from the same soundtrack. This is Abandoned Weather Station. It has a lot more dynamics from the final part to the final chorus. So let's listen to it without this EQ and let's try and make something from it. But hear how much of a dynamic change there is here. Right? So we have that. Now let's take the compressor out and let's listen to the same passage without the bass compressor here, because I want to retain the full dynamics so that we can use this dynamic EQ to its full extent, right? So just the EQ, this one that we did, actually sounds pretty cool. So let's hear it again, just the transition. I'm telling you already, if this would sound would be sent by me to a game developer. They would probably, when they send it to mastering or stuff, if it's something that gets played behind, unless it's a cut scene, there's too much dynamics. So it's beautiful to listen to that. I like it, but the one mix I sent them has already quite, it feels huge, but it doesn't have that much of a jump. Now, how could this work? So the first thing I would do is I would set the EQ on, for example, the louder part. So let's try and come up with the setting we like for the EQ without dynamic EQ in and without the compressor in. Something, I don't know, I'll just go by taste. So this sounds cool. Sounds to me a bit, closer to what I sent them, but it's just EQ. There's nothing on it. It's just like another layer of EQ that I put there. This, at the moment, is going to be applied statically to the whole track, even what is before that. So now we're going to compress it, and we're going to find a compression setting that we like, and because I don't want to redo it, I'm going to kind of copy this dude here. Quick glance, boom. I actually think that 200 might be too much for this song. It's not the same one, but just so we know, blah, blah, blah. Oh, there, all right, that's right, this could work. Hold on, why isn't it compressing at the moment? What is it over here? Yes. Of course. All right, so why wasn't it compressing? Because there's a sidechain engaged. So this is waiting for external sidechain. There is no external sidechain, so obviously it wasn't compressing. So now let's go back to it, and actually let me dial in what I had before, because things might explode because of how they're set. 30 milliseconds, 2.2, 1.4, threshold was kind of at 0. Now we have SC disengaged, so we're actually listening in the compressor to the same track we're using. So, that's why I was wrong. Okay, I think, I like it. Now, what we're gonna do now is we're gonna engage. Now, if we keep it like this, and we go back here, you see that we have close to 0 dBs of compression. So now if I engage dynamic EQ and I keep these, I don't know, to -24, because there's no compression in the lower part, the EQ is actually going to be flat. So the settings I've dialed in are not going to be there. It's only going to reach them when we start getting compression. But because I have a range at -24, it's 2 dBs of compression are just gonna barely move the needle. But I'm gonna keep this loop going and let you hear once we are in the loudest parts. Listen to how the song keeps EQing itself differently when I get close to 0 range. Up until 0 where the EQ stays static. At that point it's no longer a dynamic EQ, it's pretty much there. In stuff like this, I think that it kind of sounds cool. What I had before with the EQ was fine, then I dialed in the compressor, and now I think that I can hear some too much from the EQ when I also get compression. So this is the perfect scenario to even out things. Let's try it. So you notice what it does, and what I said, that soundtracks are actually great for this. We even brought the dynamics range in this case farther, like we decompressed the song, because we're actually not decompressing it, we're compressing it, but because we're opening up the highs and the lows, and I'm cutting some of the 200s and pumping up some 2.4, the attitude comes forward, but this attitude only comes forward when we are getting compression. The quiet part is untouched. So if this was a live recording and you only had 2 tracks, and you get away from your thinking, I could mix this with 100 virtual instruments and blah, blah, blah. You only have 2 tracks that you tracked the band with. Now you're starting to think, all right, I need dynamic EQing. I need it because, I need things to move. I could cut stuff around and then do different equalizations. Then I have to listen to all of the transitions. This thing flows around. It's a different way of doing EQ and compression, but I see why Acustica wanted to make this. It's kind of innovative in a way. Now, 2 things. We have stereo link fully engaged, which I kind of like in this scenario. I gotta say that the lows and the highs are keeping constantly in center, but I'm gonna move this. And then the second thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use some of these EQ with the green LEDs to even to counteract the behavior even more. So for example, you see I'm cutting 200 Hertz, right? Why am I doing that? I'm doing it because when compression kicks in, that part kind of becomes a bit more important than it should be to me. So I could emphasize this behavior by pumping some dBs at the same frequency in the sidechain EQ. So now the compressor has a mix that actually has even more 200 than it would have before. Or, something I also like to do a lot, I could follow what I did in the A EQ. So I could de-energize even the monitoring section so that the compression is doing less compression and therefore less EQ, and therefore I'm hiding my dynamic equalization even more than I was doing before. So let's try it. Let's just keep it rolling and This is actually pretty cool to follow along through. It's incredibly subtle, and I wouldn't probably think that in a mixed context you would do it, but imagine again if this was a kick track or maybe a mix with the same mix emphasizing the lows so that you can make the mids come up. So when you have the drummer kicking a bit more kick, then you might have a little bit more piano coming in so it doesn't feel that the kick in a jazz live recording is disconnecting. There's a lot of ideas that these actually helps you achieve. I think I was surprised at how the 200 aren't actually that much there, but the perceived mass to me becomes a little bit too much when the compressor kicks in. So I'm still very happy. Then the more the compressor is compressing, the more low mids we lose and the more highs, lows and mid highs we gain. This could be a ticket for getting very loud mixes to be mastered as well. I know some of you watching these are already thinking like, that's actually pretty cool, because what happens is when the bass drops, then you compress it to reduce the dynamic range, but then you also apply some dynamic equalization to lose some of the low mids, frequencies that are not necessarily bad, but that are preventing your mix to be incredibly loud, which happens in EDM, stuff that is on Beatport, blah, 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 charts and all of the Amsterdam electronic scene, house. It's still kind of loudness war oriented. So this could be your ticket, just to shave things even before a limiter, for example. That would be cool. But again, lots of uses. What is here I already discussed. The only thing I haven't touched on is the output on the EQ, which becomes kind of cool because even the output is being applied dynamically. So it becomes sort of an expander. That's what the manual says, which is kind of true. You can gain even more volume. I'm curious to see what happens if I go plus or minus. I haven't tried these, so I'm curious. Exactly. I know some people might have jumped on the chair. Now you hear it. Now you hear what I'm talking about. Like the output is really giving it away. Because to create a dynamic EQ out of a Masalek-oriented equalizer, obviously it's playing with transparency over transparency over transparency, so it makes things kind of hard to say like, oh wow, now I can really hear the kick is going away. But it could be great as a de-esser, and it could be great as an audio leveler for whatever you have. Like if loud parts, you want them compressed, tighter, and then brought up, this already did it. The moment we hit the loud part and we had compression of 1 dB, our range already brought it up. And because I had a 5, so we would reach 5 dB gain on our 5 dB gain reduction, we actually were kind of close to be sort of aggressive. If I bring this to the minus, who knows? Maybe this is a natural compressor, like a volume knob. What happens if I go minus? Horrible, right? But this is how you really understand it. I overlooked this. This is how I'm gonna get the message across. This is how we're gonna nail it. This is now really telling you how the compressor is affecting the EQ. Now there's no way around it. You can really hear it, right? Let's move the range now and hear what happens to the volume, which is just our flag. We don't care about what it does. It sounds horrible, but it's just a way for us to hear how the EQ is applied to the compression dynamic factor. So I'm gonna go from minus 24 to 0. Let's try minus 24. Pretty mild, right? Because we need minus 24 GR to hit minus 15. So in scale, when we have 1, we probably have, just a couple decibel, couple cents. Now 0. 0 already applies minus 15. Why? Because even with 0 GR in the compressor, we ask her to apply our dynamic EQ, including volume, at the 0 GR. So that's like not dynamic at all. But so let's try the -5 ahead. Okay, so think about it like this. Every time you hear the volume going down, it's the time in which your settings of the EQ are the closest to what you dialed. So the transients are actually the ones that are getting our EQ, but the other stuff doesn't. So that's pretty cool. Let's play with the attack and release and get something musical going on, because this could be a cool trick. Let's get this pumping to be kind of musical, and let's then tone it down to be more invisible. Okay, this is kind of in tempo with the song. Now we're going to push this to 0 because I don't want the volume change. And let's just hear if we can tell how the compressor is applying EQ only on those parts. So almost like 8 notes kind of stuff. Yeah. Let's exaggerate it at like +8 highs and +8 lows, and let's try and hear if we can really hear the hits of lows and highs on those transients. It's actually pretty dynamic and pretty lively, right? Which you wouldn't have on a regular EQ. So we're moving there every time we have a dip. You could even use it to further emphasize transients somehow. It's like someone would not only cue, but actually like quickly move the volume fader every time the percussions hit. So lots of ideas, but I mean, this one's complicated. This one's complicated for sure. But we didn't leave any angle for it to hide. I think this is it. You know, now if you watch these in the future, whatever, you're gonna get a lot of ideas like, wow, I had a song, I could have used these on just to get things lively in some parts, and in others just, you know, break away from the sort of like chains of compression, right, somehow. I think it can be used alone, with another compressor, with another EQ especially. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, this is cool. Now, the stereo version they have is even more complicated. For some parts it's easier, for some it's complicated. Because what it can do is the same stuff, but you no longer have the green EQ, you only have two left, mid, right side EQs. So now everything we said can be taken to mid and side. That's as simple as it is. Everything we said can now become mid and side. So we could set it up so that when things hit hard, hear me out, because this is gonna be very cool, you're gonna love this. When things hit very hard and the compressor goes down, our side channel expands. Because usually when you have loud stuff and you compress it and you get dBs out of gain, you kind of lose soundstage, right? That happens, especially if you want to go extremely loud. So let's set this thing up so that when we are compressing, we get some more vibe from the side channel, right? So how do we do it? First, I want to set it up for defaults. I heard you say that. Like he's gonna do the defaults. I want mid-side already. I want control link already. I actually don't want control link on this. I want these all in. See how much time it takes to turn a band on, especially in this plugin. So I don't wanna deal with all of the drama of this stuff. Stereo link, again, it's going to work from mid and side, so it's a very different thing now than left and right. Let's go 1.4. I haven't touched the ratio before, right? No, I should have, but you get the gist. I mean, we got it. We got you, complicated plugin of the day. There's no way around it. I like kind of 5, right? Before. Stereo link, I kind of like 30, but let's go completely off. Whatever happens to the mids, happens to the mids. Whatever happens to the side, happens to the side. This one, let's not engage, just because it doesn't compress. Let's go default. Oh, no, we need this, 9, 6. Thousands of people are gonna use these settings for absolutely no reason. 200. I like to use the scroll wheel a lot on Acustica Audio plugins. For whatever reason, I think it kind of feels more like because of the delay sometimes on the settings and stuff. I don't know. No, here, right? 9, 6. We're set. Go. Go, go, go. Awesome. Store. All right, so now let's set the compressor. All right, so we're getting 1 dB we're getting 4 dBs of compression from the side, from the mid, sorry, and we're getting pretty much 0 from the side. So trick here is to go in stereo link full. So we're gonna make sure that everything we get as compression I actually like it better in stereo link full, so 0. So backwards, let's not do that because it's gonna compress the same way. So we have barely any compression on the side channel, but I'm hoping this would be enough. So no dynamic EQ. Let's try and find a setting of the side channel that feels wider to us. All right, how about 1 dB at 862 Hertz? Boom, done. Let me try 14 dB per octave. It might be cooler. It actually is. Let me save. Okay, so now we have this. It's an EQ that does nothing, just 1 dB at 862 Hertz with kind of a wider Q. So, like it feels better, like more centered towards what I thought. So I don't know, 14 is better than 9. This is now being completely static, however, right? So now we want to apply it dynamically. We don't want to have this when we have zero compression. We only want to have it when we have actual compression. So we go dynamic EQ, and we're going to move this to -24 and then kind of move towards 0. The other way around would be this. Crank the band on the dB, on the EQ for the dBs that you want. So don't go subtle, go +8, right? It's even easier to notice, like, okay, I know what I wanted here. I wanted 862 Hertz +8. But then you use the range to actually mitigate that +8. So you're not really getting +8 like ever, unless you go 0 range, right? So I kind of liked it here, and let's try without, like at -24, and then let's get close to, I don't know, 5. You're gonna hear that the 800 goes boom and opens up only when it's loud. Wow, this is pretty cool. You cannot say it's not cool. Let's try again with the range at -6. Hear how, I mean, it's hard to say, but the quieter part isn't bloated with too much 800, and then the chorus explodes. So this plugin alone for this makes it worth for every song. We're gonna try it on a rock song after. How about without this band? It's actually insane because now you can really hear the strings on the sides. Why can you hear the strings on the sides? Because what I also added is that I want a little bit less 240 on the mid and a bit less 862, exactly where I'm doing the side boost, I'm doing a mid cut. So it's kind of redefining the whole thing. Again, think about it if you have a live recording. That's insane. But think about it if you have a soundtrack. This is actually pretty cool. Now, how about a rock mix? This is gonna be hard because there's actually no dynamics in here. Let's try just here to try and see if we can expand this part. Or you know what? Let's try it. Let's get ahead. I think I got the message across. I don't care. It's fine. You're gonna have to live with my soundtracks. Ha. But conclusions are worthier than another test. It is cool. Is it similar to what you would do with the dynamic EQ with graphs and stuff? No. Do you need one or the other? You need both. They're different products. They do different things. But from a euphonic perspective, this is much more of a in the music kind of thing, I think. The others are more like I need a surgical thing to fix these and that. What is left here to do? Nothing. Oh, the 3-band, of course. No, 3-band. We gotta do the 3-band. So let's pause the other. Let's keep just the EQ and let's listen to these other soundtrack, the one we had before. Let's keep the louder part and let's take a look at these compressor last, because the limiter I already covered, so I'm not gonna cover. I'm gonna force you to watch the video that I have on my YouTube channel, just so you know, because everybody said it's awesome, so we're gonna use that. First things first, crossover 100 is fine, 1.5 is fine here as well, 32, 32, 32. Ratio 1.4. You notice I'm a fan of 1.4. Clipper, me don't want. Okay. Preamplifier, yes. Store as default. So now every time we open it, boom, this is how it's gonna be set up. What do these knobs do? You have 3 bands, low, mid, and high. These 3 bands can be turned on and off with the in, which actually completely mutes that part. So think about it as a reverse solo. It's a mute button. Better. You can trim left and right inputs, which I really like as a function. You have a mix as well. And the most important part is you can set where the low ends and where the high starts. So 100 to 1.5 is going to be our mid-range, and the extreme parts are going to be handled by the other ones. The trim sets the dBs of compression in the threshold that you want to have, but the T-hold in general, the blue one, is the overall compression factor. So I would first move to get some sort of compression to everything, and then try and see if I can untangle the 3 bands to get the best out of them, rather than what I would have to do with the actual 1-band compressor. Then you have attack and release, you already know these, makeup you already know, ratio you know. If you need it in expander mode, you can do expander mode. So instead of compressing, it's expanding. That's another interesting feature I'm gonna try last. So first thing I would do is try and listen to the actual crossovers. So you see that if you turn all of these on, you have no signal, right? So I wanna try and listen to the crossover points. Maybe they're right, maybe they're not. It depends on song to song. I'm always puzzled by 100 and 200. In my soundtracks, I kind of think that around 150, there's a lot of the transitory motion towards melodic instruments, but in rock music, usually 100 is kind of cool because you have a lot of the low rhythm section. Let me hear the highs. Again, in rock, I usually tend to go for a 1.5. Here, my soundtracks, I think we're past that. Maybe 3K would be fine. So the mids almost have everything now, right? Let's keep it 100, 3K. Let's engage everything, move the threshold. This is my second step. Engage compression. Now we have compression, but now we have a lot of compression from the lows and we don't have a lot of compression from the highs, actually nothing. So now we're gonna trim them so that we can get a little bit of motion between all of the bands equally as a starting point. Have you noticed how, and this is my emulation of it, when it goes cha-kam, we see highs being engaged, and then when we hear boom, the percussion, we have lows. That's the beauty of multi-band compression, because now we have control over those three elements, which are already actually different parts of the whole song. So now we're gonna try and see if I make up things differently, how I can emphasize different parts of the song. Maybe I want zero compression on the lows, but you heard how cool multi-band compression is. What I don't like about them is that when you use them, it's typical that you want to go for a no compromise sort of attitude. So you can tone it down. I mean, now I'm really going, I want you to hear it, but you notice how we go for a no compromise solution, and sometimes it feels like you want to be, it's kind of overconfident. Somehow, I don't know how to explain it. Like the music really wants you to be, at the top 40 charts. I don't know. But I mean, it sounds fantastic. This is super overlooked, people. You don't use it as much as you should. I don't know. I'm okay. I don't use multiband that much. But every time I use it, like I should use it more. So what else? Let's try and get less compression from the lows. And actually, the rest is kind of fine. I mean, hear how transparent this is. Think about it, there's only one section, the lows, that are getting completely chunked. I went to 0, from 0 to 10, and I mean, it sounds like you have smaller speakers here. The crossovers are so well done, it's incredible. On lead vocals, this is the ticket for getting them to sound like I'm gonna nail these vocals like it's, there's no tomorrow. This is gonna get on the top 40 stuff. Multi-band is just insane. You always have a low registry that is beautifully full, and then the highs are never too much, and the mids have the attitude. That's also great. But here, I mean, it's so integrated without being, it doesn't feel like I'm doing these wild moves, right? So 100 and 0.1, this actually really works. Now, last but not least, I want to try and do expansion on lows and highs and keeping the middle steady. I don't know, usually on heavy rock mixes and stuff, it kind of works, makes things sound less compressed. Here, there's not a lot of compression going on, so it might be weird, but let's try this. Let me solo one band. Actually, let me solo the highs and go in expansion. You hear it, right? When it's more compression, it's actually coming out, not going down. So let's try the same thing on the lows. This is beautiful. You hear how the heat stays there and then the ambience goes whoom, comes forward, right? So now let's keep lows and highs and the middle here. Right? You hear how it's moving, right? Now the last thing I would do is take the T-hold and back it off. And this is a global command and everything is gonna be less grabby and less grabbed by the compressor. So I like how it goes. It's a little bit too much. Maybe not a little bit, like quite a lot. But it's kind of making things move a little bit better. You see now here, it's particularly important that you have long attacks and long releases. Yeah, is it starting to make sense? Yes. I mean, the guy who did these Masleks, I mean, he's a genius. So if he put 3.2, there's a reason. We know there is. Again, that panning part. Okay, it's a completely different process. Without, it sounds scooped. It sounds kind of wrong sometimes without, and with it sounds kind of fuller, and your ears always want all that much information. However, obviously, it's the tendency to it. It's gonna sound a lot more processed. So you see, I'm compensating for the output and all that. So that's pretty much it. I think there's really nothing. There's no, maybe the 3 bands come, no. Okay, the 3 bands actually come only in the normal version. There's not a true stereo version. The other plugin, which is, you know, good to say, is the limiter. Again, go on my YouTube channel. There's a video I've made of this, and just for kicks, I'm gonna set these up and we're gonna take a look at, you know, its behavior. Let's bring back this compressor maybe that we liked, right? And the EQ that we liked, and just the limiter afterwards with my usual kind of 4 steps that made me famous. And now let's listen to the low parts and let's say goodbye, because this is cool. Oh, nice. I really like touched it, feather touch, even if the moves are so wild. It just has a little bit more of an enticing vibe, and it sounds more packed and ready for distribution. Maybe it doesn't sound as wide, as musical, as open. The lows are not floating that much, but this translates much better in a lot of systems than what I had before. So it is a mission accomplished thing, and there's a detail that kind of never loses, but in the quietest part, it's not that much, so it's respectful of the dynamics. I really like this limiter. I think, it finds its place in a lot of plugin lists, I think. So thank you very much for being here. It was quite a cool Monday. I'm happy that I was able to get, again, back to you on the whole suite, and I thought we would do it not with videos, not with makeup, not with special effects, but just, real life, 2 songs, all of the suites, plugins there, as easy as it seems. It's actually, for me, the best way to get a lot of content out. I think we stayed here for around 2 hours, so, pretty cool. This concludes everything that I personally know about the IVORY suite and that I had fun messing with in the past weeks. It's definitely, hear it for yourself. It might suit you or not. It works. It definitely does what it says on the label. The dynamic EQ is something different. The mid-side version of it is an eye-opener on a lot of stuff because it does things with the more mild mechanic than other dynamic EQs do, but it does it in the context of the sound of the IVORY suite or the Mazalek stuff that it's inspired to. I'm gonna say that. It clearly is. So it's a very, very cool combination of elements. And I think it is hard to understand and grasp at first, but this whole suite has a lot of stuff. And if you're working with combined tracks rather than single tracks more, I would say, obviously this has an appeal to you more than if you have, a lot of things that you have in a session. These are not channel strips by definition, but if you had just this suite, would you be able to provide me or other people with a very cool master if I send you a mix? I think so. If you have the listening in the rooms, if you have the ears, if you have, the taste, experience, most importantly, the inspiration and willingness to do it, I think, you would be able to get anything from different genres, different styles of music, different delivery mediums. There's no reason why you shouldn't. A lot of studios have 2 or 3 of these units, and that's about it for mastering. So, there's a reason for it, because they're versatile and they never sound like, oh, your masters sound all the same. No, they take their program material and then deliver it to something else. So I'm very happy that you were with me. Remember, these initiatives are all 100% free. If you like them, go check my music out. There's not this stuff because this is gonna get out in some time, but there's other soundtracks in this style that I write. There's music I produce with bands and stuff. So, give it a listen, put it in your Spotify playlist, harass everybody, that you find on the street. I'm not asking for much. Just tell everybody all the time, and it doesn't matter if they block you. That's perfect. How hard can it be? Am I asking too much from your life? No, seriously, just get there. There's limited editions in floppy disks that you can still buy. Some songs have them. Yes, actual floppy disks, like this thing here, right? That you all came to love and use in the past. But, the soundtrack's called Future in the Past, so that's why it is what it is. So these versions really work on MS-DOS, Amiga computers, Commodore, whatever, 1200, 600, 4000 Amiga, even Solaris. I think I've made formats for the songs, and they're very fun to listen to because they're mono sometimes, or 8 kilohertz, different codecs and things. So you're plenty capable of finding me over the internet. If you have questions or anything, we're gonna do these more because I have pretty much around 8 weeks of therapy for my Achilles tendon now that it's repaired, but it needs healing. So what better way for me to spend a fantastic Monday with you and with all the people from the future, which are the people that are gonna watch this video after it's being done. Thank you very much. It's been super fun. Thanks to Acustica for bearing with me and my explanations and, you know, all of my reports and stuff. It's an honor doing this for companies that like what they do and do it because they like it first and foremost. You know, that's sort of a motto that I do. And I think that when people work that way, there's usually good results. So thank you very much. Take everything I've said, make it your own, make your music better. Go to somebody else who doesn't know this and tell them, I know how to use it. If you don't want to point them to my videos, it's fine. Just, you know, tell them, inform them, educate people, you know. That's about the fun that we're going to have. So thank you very much again. You know where this is going. Ciao.